just going to get us going and go quickly, guys. Okay, good evening. It is Monday, March 16th, 6:01 p.m. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Palo Alto Public Improvement Corporation. If the clerk could please take the roll.
Board Member Cormack? Here. Board Member Du Bois?
Here.
Board Member Filseth? Here. Chair Fine?
Here.
Board Member Nis? Here. Board Member Koo?
Here.
Did you turn that on? Board Member Tanaka? Greg, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. 7 present.
Great. So the only item of business tonight is the approval of the fiscal year 2019 Palo Alto Public Improvement Corporation's annual financial report. Do we have any public speakers?
No, we cannot.
Okay. Is there a staff presentation?
No presentation. We just note that this is your annual meeting as required for the corporation.
Great. With that, I'm going to move the staff recommendation.
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Cormack. If you have any questions or comments, hit your lights. Councilmember Tanaka?
No.
All right, would you please vote on the board? And Councilmember Tanaka, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. That passes unanimously, at which point we are adjourning the Palo Alto Public Improvement Corporation. I think that was a record. All right, it is 6:02 p.m. I'd like to convene the City Council meeting of Monday, March 16th. If the clerk would please take the roll.
Councilmember Cormack?
Here.
Vice Mayor Du Bois?
Still here.
Councilmember Filseth? Mayor Fine?
Here.
Councilmember Nis? Yep. Councilmember Koo?
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka?
Here.
7 present.
Thank you very much. Our first item of business is a closed session item, conference with City Attorney on existing litigation, Santa Clara County Superior Court, Miriam Green versus the City of Palo Alto. Is there a motion to go into closed session? Thank you, Councilmember Filseth, and seconded by the Vice Mayor. If you'd please vote on the board. And Greg, how do you vote on the going into closed session?
Yes.
Thank you so much. We will see you in the conference room. I'm sorry, I don't have an updated agenda. I think we have 45 minutes for this one, so we'll be back out then. Thank you. From closed session. Item number 2 has been moved to the end of the agenda. Our rail communications update has been canceled for the night, which moves us to agenda changes, which are those two. Item 2 is at the end of our agenda. Item 3 has been canceled. No other additions and deletions. I will note, if item number 6A goes too long, we can kick off item 7 if necessary. And with that, we go to oral communications. Do we have any members of the public?
No, we do not.
I won't make any comment about that. Minutes approval, item number 4, approval of action minutes for February 24th and March 2nd. If there's a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Cormack, seconded by Councilmember Niss. If there's no discussion, would you please vote on your board? And Councilmember Tanaka, how do you vote on the minutes?
Yes.
I think I heard him say yes. So that passes unanimously. Thank you all. Next up is our consent calendar, items 5 and 6. Do we have any public speakers?
No, we do not.
Okay. If there's a motion on consent.
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Cormack. Seconded by Councilmember Niss. Any comments on the consent calendar? If you would please vote on the board. Thank you. And Greg, how do you vote on consent?
Yes.
Thank you. So that passes unanimously, which brings us to city manager comments.
Actually, I have no comments this evening since we have been very focused on COVID-19, so we'll just dispense with that tonight.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure they will be rolled up into that item. Item number 6A, a update regarding the city's response to COVID-19, including community education and city service changes, and the potential ratification of the proclamation of a local emergency. Does staff have a presentation on this?
We do. We have a brief presentation that perhaps can provide a foundation for the council. All right, let's see if we get this working. All right, just a quick overview. Tonight we'll be requesting
Actually,
council.
can I ask someone to forward it to me?
Can we forward Greg the presentation, please? It's on its way, Greg.
Thank you.
All right, so that should be there any second. Provide the overview again. Tonight is the ratification of the proclamation of local emergency. This was done late last week at the staff level, and ratification tonight, or ratification is required under law. We are also proceeding, and have been proceeding with the monitoring and coordination of our activities with numerous other agencies, and we'll be speaking to some of the specific activities this evening. And finally, public information. I think that it's fair to say that we've ramped up our public information at a level that is really somewhat unprecedented. And while there's always more we can do in that area, this is one I think that we should be very proud of. All right, just a quick overview. Again, this is our public messaging. Stay home if you're sick, practice hygiene, best practices, support our most vulnerable community members. Little slip there. And urging community to stay calm. Now, clearly there has been rapid development of these, both the specific messages as well as the orders that have been coming out of our county public health office, as well as now multiple other Bay Area counties in coordination with each other. So let me speak to that quickly. Again, in terms of the number of cases, we are certainly on the rise in cases such that the county health officers have chosen to take very significant action. Our city facility closures have been an area of great activity for us and your staff over the course of the last week, or maybe a little more than that, as we have prepared for social distancing as well as staffing contingencies, and has really been a significant work effort in and of itself. Now today, the Bay Area-wide order for residents in all 6 counties via the coordinated actions and orders of the public health officers for the 6 counties to shelter in place. Staff has immediately worked, since this order is effective at midnight tonight, on defining the essential services for which staff will be directed to report to work tomorrow versus some functions, many functions, which will continue on a remote work mode. And really, that is the majority of employees that are not involved in direct public safety response or first response and orders, and recognizing that there are multiple facets of our city organization that provide support to those ongoing services, as well as the other areas that are exempt from the order today. So I would like to just speak briefly about our focus areas for it as an organization, in how we have approached setting our priorities and the work that has been ongoing for the past weeks, as well as will proceed going forward. First has been fundamentally maintain our ability to respond to emergencies. That's certainly the most essential service provided by the City of Palo Alto, as it is with any city. At the same time, we have to ensure that our community is aware of the guidance that is being provided both by the city, but more importantly, quite frankly, from the county health office that has the lead in our coordinated response across all agencies, as well as the resources that are available to the community in this emergency period. That said, we have also been focused on addressing the highest priority community needs as they have presented themselves. Now, there is certainly a multiplicity of perspectives on what those high priority needs are, and we have been taking steps to assist us, the city and the council, going forward in being able to both effectively act on it independently as well as in coordination with other agencies. And finally, what our focus has been to this point, to appropriately adapt routine business, such as how we've adapted our library services, both in terms of the service themselves as well as communication about the services to the community. Now we are certainly in a new mode in which those services which are not deemed essential will be curtailed for a period of at least weeks. In terms of the most recent activities, would note and certainly ask Director Duker to jump in here, that we have focused over the last really not much more than 48 hours on a few of the items focused are described here. First, the activation of our Emergency Operations Center, which Director Duker can describe as a management structure. We have continue to monitor other cases and working with our other agencies, as well as activating this Citizen Core Council, which is a really important structure for us to work with our partners in the community and identifying and implementing our leadership plans and protocols within the city organization. So with that, let me ask Director Duker to perhaps expand on those activities.
Great. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Honorable Council, OES Chief Duker here. As Mr. Shikata alluded to, we're in the midst of, to put it mildly, an evolving situation, and something that is very foreign to anybody who was not alive in the 1918 Spanish flu, which would be pretty much everybody here, I think. So we have an evolving situation. We have a situation that the city only partially owns and very little control, which is very frustrating for those of us who like to set policy and take action. It doesn't feel good to not be in the driver's seat. I can tell you that from my perspective. I'm sure it's amplified at your level as well. That said, the city is doing everything we can realistically do to maintain our essential services, especially public safety, utilities. There are a lot of services that I won't belabor that are done by departments that might not instantly seem essential, but when you pull the proverbial thread, they do appear to be so, such as our park rangers. In case you missed it, we are already in wildland fire season as well. So just because we're dealing with this particular crisis does not mean we have the luxury of ignoring all the others that are on our risk scorecard. I'm just going to speak briefly about community coordination because that is something that is really essential for us to do. 2 weeks ago when I addressed you, we talked about the luxury that we have of all the resources in our area. The flip side of that is there's an implicit, now explicit burden for us to utilize those effectively and communicate. It is natural for the city as the city government to be the touch point, if not the clearinghouse, to bring those groups together. So the Citizen Court Council, for those who are not familiar with that, you can go to cityofpalto.org/CCC for Citizen Court Council. And in brief, it is a pre-established group. It's not a formal board and commission. It's not subject to the Brown Act, but it's existed since roughly the 1940s in many jurisdictions, including ours, to do explicitly this: bring stakeholders together who have a role to play in the response to and recovery from a community crisis, no matter what that is. And in this case, it's going to test all of those bonds that we've spent now over a decade building with Stanford University, Stanford Hospital, Palo Alto Medical Foundation, the school district, the Chamber of Commerce, and so on. This is a team response, if not fight. I really appreciate the mayor's participation in the meetings. I know he's got a lot of things to do, and Councilmember Koo as the assigned liaison to that body. That said, there are many other stakeholders that we're also explicitly contacting. For example, all of the senior and skilled nursing facilities in town, all of the houses of worship in town. If you read the health order, there are a lot of things that are going to be very much different in how these NGOs and CBOs can operate. And some of them, if they can be aligned with our public safety mission, they would then be allowed to operate. And if they operate alone, they may not be legally. So a lot of devil in the details aspects. That's the high level. I don't want to belabor it, but I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. One additional note that was included in our most recent public information push is that we are establishing a community support call center that should be active by Wednesday of this week, and that part of the lead time on getting that up and running is to ensure that we've got scripts available for the call takers to be able to have information that will be useful to our residents. One quick example of that is, as you may have heard in today's both announcement and some of the follow-up Q&A, that food distribution is an activity that the County of Santa Clara has assigned to the City of San Jose to take the lead on. And I know a number of council members and I were able to participate both in watching that as well as follow-up conference call that was held to identify some of the follow-up actions. It does appear at this point that the City of San Jose is relying on individual cities to identify the needy population that might be interested in participating in a food distribution system. And so this community support call center will be an important gateway for our residents to be able to access that program among others, and again, simply to answer questions as the case may be. So with that, let me then just cover a few additional points, and we can get to the council's discussion. So in terms of how we're responding to the issues, the management challenge of something that is as fast moving as this certainly is one that can't be underestimated. So a few principles that we and our management team have been deploying, certainly trying to think strategically as to how our steps, both getting through this emergency, need to be looked at, recognizing that this in all likelihood, is a multi-month, if not longer, duration event that we are planning for, and ensuring that our steps are both sustainable as well as have that perspective in mind, but nonetheless is one that is changing on a, in many cases, hour-by-hour basis. We've been focused on the basic city functions that the city is responsible for, and recognize that, as Ken pointed out, we participate in, but we don't own in many cases. So some of the options that could be taken at a local level are, quite frankly, better taken at a higher level, whether it be state, as we've seen from some governor's executive order that affects our meetings, to individual counties, and how we can best work in collaboration with those other levels of government, so that we're focused on the items that require our most direct involvement. Certainly involving the right stakeholders in decision-making is a key point, and the activation of the Citizens Core Council is one example of having a regular and immediate pipeline for information and communication among key institutions within our community is critically important. And then finally, urging the community to stay calm and help each other out, including checking on neighbors and other steps, is an equally important part of our messaging, and certainly an area that we would like to facilitate the council's engagement as well. Again, just some of our ongoing messaging, as noted earlier, we will have this customer support call center or community support call center up and running within the next couple of days. We have been using our website as a focal point for outgoing messages, ability for the community to access information. Through the Core Council discussion today, some suggestions that might enhance our ability to do that specific to business. So we'll be working on how that might be enhanced, as well as a number of both online as well as hard copy, as we talk about posters and other ways for the public to be aware of what's going on. And then finally, our community support call center, to emphasize this is a virtual center, and we'll be using some technology tools to allow this to be staffed remotely as well. So look forward to having that up and running. And so finally, our touch points and some of our ways that we've been letting the community know how to stay on top of the issues. We certainly have heard that while other levels of government are providing information, that our community wants to ensure that we're doing everything we can to reinforce current information that is tailored. And so I think we, quite frankly, need to balance our ability to stay ahead of the curve with covering those bases for which the city is directly responsible. And I'm sure in our discussion we'll talk about what some of those areas are. So with that, I think we'll leave it to Mr. Mayor for your council discussion.
Thank you.
Just want to note that we do have our senior staff for the city available in another room to make sure we don't exceed our occupancy capacity. So with your indulgence, we may have a little bit of lag between topics being brought up and staff coming into the room, but we'll endeavor to make that as seamless as possible.
Of course. Thank you, Chief and City Manager. Do we have any public comments on this item? Okay, we've gotten some emailed comments, I'll just note. Just want to frame this with a couple comments and then turn it over to all my fellow council members. So to the community, this is really an unprecedented crisis. It's rapidly developing, as the Chief mentioned, and we really need everyone to remain calm, disciplined, composed, and follow county, state, and federal guidelines and advice. Please stay home, avoid all non-essential travel, and practice increased personal hygiene, as you're seeing on the news and from federal and state sources. Help your neighbors where appropriate and safe, and please check in on the elderly and immunocompromised individuals. Let's be the best community we can be. If you feel sick, please call your doctor and describe your symptoms. Do not simply show up at the clinic. If you don't have a primary care physician, you can call Valley Connections at 1-888-334-1000. Many of you no doubt have seen the new county public health directive, as mentioned by the city manager, being put in place tomorrow. That means that starting at midnight tonight, you need to stay home. The only exceptions are for health and safety essentials. Deliveries and postal service will remain in operation, and you can also go out for recreational purposes, to a park or playground, for instance, but you must continue to practice social distancing. I want to mention we have a strong Office of Emergency Services and superb public safety professionals who are here tonight, all three of our chiefs. Thank you to you and your staff very much for keeping this community safe. They are trained for situations like this, and we are activating necessary plans and protocols. For instance, today we activated our Emergency Operations Center. To all of the city staff working here or across town, this community is depending on you more than ever, and on behalf of every Palo Alton, we are deeply appreciative of your work and your dedication to this place. I know the city manager is also focused on your health, your safety, and the wellness of your families, and this council will do everything we can to support you. Communications at times like this are very difficult, so please focus on using and sharing established communication channels, whether that's the cityofpaloalto.org/coronavirus, scc.gov.org/sites/PHD, the public health department of the county, or cdc.gov, the Centers for Disease Control. We need to work together to figure out where the public can direct their energy and ideas, but let's not overburden the professionals. I am considering an emergency ad hoc committee to augment staff in our community, but I need to work that out with the city manager and figure out where and how it will be helpful. Also, please know we are going to lean on community-based organizations in our faith communities. We will be contacting them in the time of need. Today, we convene the Citizens Core Council meeting, coordinating with hospitals, the university, Stanford Mall, the Chamber, PAUSD, Palo Alto Child Care. We are keeping each other up to date and assisting as needed. Thank you, Councilmember Koo, for joining and for supporting that. And as the city manager mentioned, the county has tasked the city of San Jose, as our largest city with the most resources, to begin working on food and water delivery to needy parties. They're beginning by focusing on seniors, but they hope to expand that core demographic with time. And we will continue coordinating with our partner agencies and organizations. Just stepping back a bit, in the span of a week, it seems like we are really, the bottom has fallen out and a lot of things are changing. So I am working with the city manager and other officials on local business support, what we can do about parking tickets. Some have mentioned an anti-eviction ordinance, ceasing any utility shutoffs, and other measures to support our residents, businesses, and nonprofits during this crisis. But let's please understand the scope of the problem before presenting or pressing for solutions. The state is also working on many of these fronts. I also want to remind us of a good side. This is some of the most beautiful weather I've seen in Palo Alto in quite a while. I saw a couple planting a magnolia tree today. Cherry trees are in blossom. We have a lot to be thankful for here and a lot to protect and preserve. And then finally, and I will finish up soon, this is mainly for my colleagues, but our role on this council is not to be operators or doers so much, but to be communicators and conductors. We're here to help, but we really need to let the professionals do their job, and I cannot emphasize that enough in a crisis like this. I've asked each of my colleagues, each of you, to please take responsibility for a focus area and to play a liaison role which can augment and support our city staff. I've asked the Vice Mayor to work with PAUSD and other schools in the community. I've asked Councilmember Cormack to work on city communications, Councilmember Niss on senior and elderly issues, Councilmember Koo, with her long experience, I've asked her to work on emergency services and county coordination, Councilmember Filseth on business and economy outreach, and Councilmember Tanaka on making sure that our meetings can function smoothly and remotely. I do want to note, I really hope by next week these chambers are more empty and I'm the only one here and you are all at home. Of course, the city needs to continue making progress in other functions. Some things may slip, but we still need to run a city. And so at this point, I'd like to turn the discussion over to all of you, but please keep in mind, let's not overburden our staff with new directives and requests. And I would love to hear some answers to questions such as, what role do you think our council plays in this crisis? What should the purpose and cadence of our meetings be going forward? How do we continue core functions and not lose sight of those problems or opportunities? And anything else that you think we're missing or we'd like to hear. I think the first slide I saw was Vice Mayor Du Bois.
Yeah, thank you for all of that. So I think declaring an emergency is not something that any of us do lightly or without a lot of consideration, but it's time tonight to ratify the March 12th declaration by our city manager. I also want to say I think we're really fortunate to have a strong emergency services office and the leadership of Ken here, Ken Duker. And, while the city manager is the overall lead, Ken's going to be leading in these areas that are his expertise. And I think we're really lucky as a small city to have such a strong office of emergency services. So thank you. Just a couple of questions, comments. Many of the events when we made an announcement were listed as canceled until March 31st. So when do we expect to notify the public of more realistic dates?
Yes, we are working on extending that through April 30th and simply working on finalizing the list of events that would be best to send out at once so that word can get out.
Yeah, before today's announcement about non-essential workers, I was going to ask about the swimming pool because that seemed like a good outdoor activity where people are naturally spaced out. But I think with the edict that non-essential services be closed, I won't even go there. But I do have questions. It sounds like we're working through it about what is essential work for city staff. And for the people that are going home, are they going to continue to work from home?
To the extent possible, yes. That is the baseline direction, and so we're working the particulars through on a case-by-case basis, but in general, it is to work from home.
And I don't know if you guys can speak to this, but are we keeping any staff, kind of critical staff, more isolated than others in utilities or police, fire?
There, certainly Ken would like to respond to that. Go ahead.
Sure, yes. Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor, and thanks for the kind words, first of all. Yes, the fire department and Chief Blackshark could talk about that. We're fortunate because we have a natural shift structure, so there's a rotation of time on, time off, but there are a number of sworn and non-sworn who are not currently on line positions, training, planning, and so forth, so those are naturally being kept to telecommute. We actually implemented that some days ago, even before this directive went out. That said, part of our contingency planning, and this is CDC guidance, I'm not saying anything that should be too shocking, is that we do need to plan, like every other employer, for 40% or more absenteeism, and luck might have it that it's some of the key people which we don't have backup for. So it's absolutely one of the many contingencies that we're trying to work on. Thank you.
I would just add that I know that is also the case both in police and in utilities, essentially minimizing the interaction between staff to the extent that that's unnecessary, and continue to work with assigned equipment and assigned vehicles, as the case may be, in order to minimize, again, the necessity of using common materials, so that is a part of our strategy going forward.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to touch briefly on communication. I think communication is critical at a time like this. Also, our ability to respond to like false information that may come out. And then I think we've all probably been hearing from folks who want to help. I think as soon as there's ways to kind of funnel that energy in a positive way, getting word out on the city website, maybe directing people to ways that they can help or would be useful. In terms of the questions the mayor asked, I mean, well, a couple more quick thoughts. I have been watching a lot of cities who are passing emergency ordinances to protect businesses and protect residents. I know we talked a little bit this morning, but I just wanted to bring it up that I would like to see us as a city be ready to move forward if something doesn't happen at the state level in terms of making sure people who lose their job because of this virus aren't evicted, and potentially smaller businesses as well. I think a lot of cities moved pretty quickly and started passing ordinances last week even. And so I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
Sure. We have been in touch with our state legislative lobbyists and know that there is activity happening in Sacramento, potentially via the governor's action that would allow the kind of relief that Vice Mayor is speaking to. So we'll be watching that, and hopefully we'll see that within a matter of days.
Thanks. And then the question the mayor asked about, what do you think council should be doing? I do think there's a lot of value to normalcy in trying to get on with some of the city's business. So I'd like to see us kind of continue to meet as a council, to kind of not let all the work pile up for the next month, but, prioritize the things that are most pressing and continue to just keep the city operational. And to the effect that's, to the degree it's possible, I think council committees, if there are staff that can help support that. And, I think the last part of that, nobody from the public here tonight has asked, but I do think if we're going to continue meetings, we're going to be doing it through teleconferencing. Hopefully we can find a way that we can have the public participate and continue to have transparency while we continue to have meetings. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. I'm also struck that no one came tonight, and in a way thankful, but understanding that's a balance of democracy too, that we do need input. Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for leading us at this truly unprecedented time. I won't repeat anything that my colleagues have said. Most of the super important stuff has been covered. I just want to say that health and safety is really paramount. That should really go without saying, but I know people are talking about finances and economics, and that certainly is something we'll need to pay attention to for the city and for businesses and for individuals. But our primary responsibility as a city at this moment and going forward is health and safety. And I want to break that down, not just the people who live here, but also the people who work here, some of whom work for us. So I just want to say that all of those populations we're responsible for. I know everyone understands that, but it's important to me to say that out loud. I wonder if we, Mr. City Manager, could just talk a little bit more about utilities. With so many people sheltering in place, we just want to be sure we have assurance that hot water is going to be there when you need to wash your hands, and yeah.
That absolutely. Water, gas, electricity certainly are essential services that are provided by the city, and so our staffing plan does reflect the nature and the importance of continuing that ongoing work. So Dean Batchelor may pop into the room and may want to expand on it, but I could certainly tell the council that remains at the highest level of our priorities, and will be so. And so not only the first responders in terms of emergency calls related to utilities, but also the backup support that's necessary to ensure that they can do their work.
Okay, great. And also people are going to need electricity to charge their phones.
Absolutely.
For sure. With respect to communications, I've worked in crisis communications, and this is a level beyond anything that I think most people in this country have experienced. So I think the staff has done an admirable job so far, and I've seen adaptation from day to day. One thing I think going forward that would be helpful is having communications be more two-way. So we're starting to see people with suggestions and ideas, and I'm sure we'll find a way to take those on so it's not all emails to the city council, because that triggers sort of another thing. I just want to talk about neighbors helping each other. I think we've got top-down things, obviously, that our staff is doing, but from the bottoms up, I've already been encouraging people who've asked. I said, listen, you can't go knock on doors right now, but, email, text, phone call everyone, start a Google Doc of the people you know, how many pets there are, any concerns if people hoarded a certain supply, gloves, for example. So I know people want to do something, and I think some things will be done by the city, but some things can be done by people working with their neighbors, whether or not they're block preparedness coordinators. Good timing on our part. So I think the next thing I want to say is that I think we should acknowledge that some people will feel that we're overreacting, despite, what the county is doing or whatever, and some people will feel that we're underreacting, and I think that's normal. There's going to be a wide range of emotional responses to what's happening. And so this goes to, the vice mayor, like having a sense of normalcy. Well, I think we're going to have different definitions about what's non-essential. So we'll have to think about that, with the advice of staff. With respect to the public participating, one thing that I have felt for years is that the emails count. We read the emails come into city council, they count. You do not have to come here and speak in person for 3 minutes for your voice to be heard. So if we have to do this, remotely, emails count, and they count for me, I read them, and I'm sure my colleagues do the same. And then finally, is there anything that staff would like us to do as council members? Is there some way we can help that the mayor hasn't already identified? And that might include not doing things, so feel free to say.
Well, I think the mayor pointed out some areas of focus. Certainly being ambassadors and the voice of the city with the community is an extremely important role for you to play.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cormack. The next slide I have is Councilmember Filseth. Oh, Councilmember Niss. Sorry, we're moved around tonight.
Not that I'm sure you're certainly going to add to this anyway. So thank you to all of you. It was a wild week last week, and it's not any better this week. So, and I know it came as an incredible surprise, I would think, today that all of a sudden, or maybe you knew, Ken, did you, that suddenly the county would shut everything down?
No, ma'am. For the record, we did not know in advance, although part of our contingency plan and the reason that we might be rather well prepared for some of this is that we know the pandemic playbook, and we just moved a couple of steps ahead reasonably, but thanks for asking.
I think it's also daunting to discover we're sort of the epicenter of what's going on now. And as Councilmember Cormack just mentioned, people have wide swings. Some people I've talked to just think it's delightful that they'll get to do a whole lot of things they haven't been able to do for a while. And others are like, I don't know how long I can stay in this house. So one of the, and thank you for whichever one of you reenacted the core. Did you, Ken? Was that yours?
I will take partial credit. Retired police chief Dennis Burns and then Mayor Pat Burt and I were kind of the ones who, and those of you on the council at that time who voted for it, you all have thanks to play in reinvigorating that. We do have it as a standing body, but the city manager and I, in this case, decided to activate it. Our last event was a very nice public safety panel on power outages and power resilience, to Councilmember Cormack's point, and we had former Mayor Judy Kleinberg MC the panel, and a few weeks later this came upon us. So luckily we had the relationships. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that was very effective. So one of my thoughts is, unless one of you was really referencing this, is to put together some facts. Did either of you suggest that and I missed it?
Do you mean frequently answered questions?
Yes, right.
Yes,
Yeah.
The Chief Communications Officer has done that. So there is a list, but if you have additional ones, presumably they should be sent to the city manager.
I will throw out some of the ones that I heard today, and I hope there was a lot of, here's what you can do on the list. Because people ask things like, can you leave the city? Or, can you, if you've got reservations to go to some other part of the country, can you leave and go? I don't know that. And someone else said, are they going to check are they going to check? Will the police come and knock at your door and make sure you're there? So, and that's that wide swing that Allison just spoke of. It's like somebody's going to come to my door and the next person is saying, can I fly back to Chicago? Are there answers to those?
I think staff would like to take some of those under advisement and put them on the webpage. I can say anecdotally, and I'll take the liberty of speaking for Chief Johnson, and he can certainly come up. We will not be using our precious public safety resources to certainly check on people in their homes. or do anything that's even close to unconstitutional. So people have freedom. And by the way, if I would encourage people from our /coronavirus webpage, they can now read the entire health order that was promulgated a little bit after noon today. There's a lot of freedom baked into that. You can still go to the grocery store, pharmacy, see your doctor.
Yep,
and I
right.
believe it was alluded to by the vice mayor, you can still go walk, exercise, go to a park, enjoy the good weather. So I know there's a lot of misapprehension, and one of the problems is we've been chasing a moving target with regard to what the guidance is. Governor Newsom yesterday said if you're over 65, you really should stay at home. A lot of people took that as, well, 65-year-olds are now quarantined at home. Not true. And now we have more local guidance that is for everybody, no matter what their age. So a lot of things to do. So if council could, please avail yourself of the FAQ that's off the Cronus page, and send any input to the city manager. Thank you.
I think that's probably what we could do that would make the most difference is that people easily can access, and I think a good part of it, what you can do. Can you jump on your bike and go out to Foothill? Can you, whatever, so that you feel more of a sense of freedom. Okay, thanks. We probably have lots more suggestions, and it was interesting. One last thing I don't want to forget, the difference between lockdown and quarantine, if that can also be on the fact sheet, also totally misunderstood. So thank you. Thank you all for what you're doing.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Koo.
So I also want to say thank you for the work that you have done, very prompt in terms of ensuring that there isn't fear within our community. Especially OES is a staff of 2. So that was a lot of work that you did. I also want to thank all the staff members, Mr. Shikata, and also Megan, who has been great with all her communications out and putting together all the websites. There is one thing that I would like to ask is, I've been meeting with the small business community, and there's great fear and despair amongst them. So I would like to ask that we quickly come up with also a site where they can go to, where they have all their information at one place. For example, they mentioned the SBA, which is the Small Business Administration, which does short-term loans, I believe, in helping them for these times, these situations. But one of the business owner who had actually reached out to them a week ago said that they came back with a 9% interest rate. That is simply unacceptable. And I wonder if there's any laws that we might have already in place at the state level that may speak to anti-price gouging, and something to this effect that we can ensure that is also very prominent so it's understood.
I think there was an anti-gouging directive.
Well, if there is, it would be great if we can have a reminder.
From the county.
From the county? Okay, so let's be sure that that is very prominent. Also, what the business owners are actually asking for is that there is a guide for them, just like what we have for our community, that there is something more specific to their businesses. And a lot of them that are going to be, so I understand that you're already speaking with the state in terms of finding a way to help with defer taxes, income taxes, or in some way to help them with their wage payments. I'm not quite sure what the state is doing, but as soon as possible, I understand that they're going to be having to pay wages within four days or so. We probably won't get there to help them, but it'll be great if you do as soon as possible. Another thing is, with our employees, with the city's employees, what can we do, especially the ones that are, who are not considered needed at this moment in this time. And if they are not working at home, but they are kind of asked to stay home, what kind of things can we do to help them? They still have to pay their rents or cost of living costs. So if you can kind of give us indication on what that is, that would be great. Then the other thing is I'd like to know is what does the city consider, what kinds of responsibilities, if you can tell us later, what kind of responsibilities falls under state, what falls under county, and what falls under the city, and then what falls under the private sector. So that would be very helpful for us to kind of segment out what we need to do. Also, can you also provide for us something that tells us what is the priorities that you place in in terms of what is essential? And then also, I know we're taking care, you've been in communication with the senior care facilities and so forth, but I was wondering, what are we doing about the homeless? I know county had mentioned something, I mean, this afternoon they mentioned, if there's homeless, that to the degree if we're able, so they don't have to be isolated or in quarantine or at home because they don't have a home, but if we are able to provide sheltering, is there outreach to faith-based or to, I don't know how we do that, but if you can take that into consideration also. And how are we notifying the RV dwellers? Also, because Palo Alto Unified School District is closed down, where are there studies, online studies, if there's any way that we can communicate with them for the folks with disabilities? Because a lot of times they're also still getting services from PAUSD. How are they, how are they being taken care of? And then in terms of, Councilmember Cormack mentioned that the community always really wants to help. And I know that we had a SOP on pandemic. Can you redistribute it to the BPCs just to refresh them on it? And also, while I appreciate that we should check on our neighbors, but to really emphasize doing it by telephone or by email, leaving notes at the doorstep and no close contact would be really great. But a redistribution of that pamphlet about pandemics and how we should be working on it would be essential. Lastly, I wanted to, again, say thank you, but I wanted to make sure that I understand that the city attorney's office is working on ensuring that there is a eviction moratorium that we're looking at if the state is not going to push forward with that. Okay, and then also I'd like to ask that we have, you look into a resolution that encourages commercial, residential lenders and public utilities to have a 60 or 90-day moratorium on default payments for customers, including small businesses. Yes? Thank you. That was a nod from the city attorney, so thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Filsath.
Well, I'll be pretty brief here. So first of all, I don't think we're overdoing this. I think, anybody that looks at what's coming out of Italy, you look at that and go, boy, we should try not to have that happen here. So I don't think we're overdoing it. So thank you for what you guys have been doing. A couple thoughts and just a question in a second. One of the things I noticed is, the information flow is turning into a fire hose, right? And so the county health order here today is 10 pages and so forth. And there's going to be tons and tons of information floating around, and it's going to get out of date real fast and so forth. And I think, so one of the challenges on the communication front is going to be sort of keeping it terse and the most important stuff easily available so that people can figure out which way is up and so forth. So I don't envy you that challenge, but I think it's going to be important, right? I want to ask about the CCC. You said they're coordinating and bringing stakeholders together, but can you put a little more color on what's the deliverable? What should we be looking to them to do? And
Sure. So I won't bore you with a reading from the municipal code. It's somewhere buried in 2.12, but you can, there you go. You can look up it is also very long, yes, sir. But the charter of it is an advisory body. When the mayor is president, it's called the Emergency Services Council, which is usually how the standard nomenclature goes. We have in our city partnered explicit with Stanford University. So the formal title is the Palo Alto Stanford Citizen Corps Council, in acknowledgement of our special relationship with them and the fact that for public safety and health resources, we are very much the one and the same entity.
so does that mean if I want to know where to get tested and Stanford is the place, then I can ask the CCC? Is that the kind of stuff you're talking about?
That would be beyond the purview of the CCC exactly, because that gets to Councilmember Ku's question about what's the responsibility of other echelons of government. So the CCC is not an information clearinghouse for people wanting to know where to get tested necessarily, although certainly on this morning's call, we talked about that. And for those who are wondering about the essential functions of government, one of our challenges is with so few test kits around, how might we partner explicitly with Stanford Hospital in this case? So that's one down in the weeds pending example. But the charter of it is, as we alluded to before, to bring the key stakeholders together in a standing structure, which is mainly a glorified email list, to be frank, most of the time. And we do good events where we educate the community and we compare notes. That's most of what it is. As the mayor talked about in the start of this topic, we're in uncharted territory. This is very unprecedented. This is different than what most of us are used to planning for, which is earthquakes, major crime, cyber attack even. This is pretty far out. So we're leveraging the resources that we have, and we're having regular sessions and discussions. Remember, they're an advisory body. They're not a formal body. They're not a board and commission. They're meant to essentially be a forum, non-Brown Act, non-public, just to allow us as the responding entities and the recovering entities to compare notes. So that's really the essence of the CCC.
Just jumping in, I haven't been on the call, and Councilmember Koo can maybe comment as well. A few things that came up. So one is the mall mentioned, stores which were closing for short duration or longer duration. The hospitals mentioned some other issues around traffic concerns and whether our police department could help out and coordinate efforts around that, things like that.
Okay, so let me ask a litmus test and make sure I understand this. So your example of stores closing. So for example, I discovered somewhere that Safeway, instead of being open 24/7, is now open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., okay, because they're going to restock at night and so forth. Is that the kind of information you guys would discuss in the CCC? And if so, how does the larger community find that out?
Yes, and that is a good litmus tester. So that might have been discussed. I'll give you another example of what we discussed. Childcare for critical health workers, that was on the agenda for today, and we were fortunate to find out that the hospital right now is okay, but that could change, and they would partner with the university and other partners to do that. So we've seen childcare come up as a very legitimate concern, not only because schools are closed, libraries are closed, but you can't just put people in a childcare center because of social distancing. So how might we solve that riddle? You can't just establish an alternate childcare. So those are there. With regard to Safeway and how might that information get promulgated, part of the charter is to get our public messaging as aligned as it realistically can be without throwing out a lot of jargon. There's Joint Information Center. So this thing exists among the Bay Area counties, which you saw with that alignment of the health order. And how does that get promulgated in a coordinated way without one jurisdiction saying X and the other one saying Y, or worse, X minus 1, if you get my drift? So that can be there, but I think to Mr. Shikata's point about the Community Resource Call Center, that will be where intelligence that might come in, you go shopping and you happen to notice the sign that says, hey, Safeway changed their hours. It might not be a call, it could be a web forum too that we're gonna work on. It sounds like the mayor has something up his sleeve about that. That would be how that would be efficiently relayed. That's a little bit down in the weeds for the policy-setting body and the big think that needs to go on at the CCC. Does that help?
Very much.
Very
Thanks.
good. Thank you, sir.
May I just add a little more? So another thing that the CCC does is that they share information, and so then, it's very productive when we know what Stanford's concerns are. For example, one of the things that they're very, very clear on is that for their, they want to keep their hospital staff healthy and safe, which is why, they have caution about who approaches, who comes to the hospital, where are the barriers in place. So that's one thing that they wanted to share with us. Another one is security detail. So the chief and Palo Alto Unified School District, as well as the hospitals and PAMF, share what kind of security details they're in need of. That's what was most foremost in my mind.
And in case folks are interested, you can learn more at cityofpaloalto.org/CCC, lists the players and partners there, and we will continue to meet as necessary, I'm sure. I don't see any other lights here, but we have Councilmember Tanaka on the phone.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to quickly say that I also want to I'll express my appreciation of the staff, residents, businesses, my fellow council members, our city manager, for all coming together to try to get through this. This is definitely unprecedented and a critical time for our city. And, I'd like to also thank our mayor for actually getting together that Slack group. I think that's awesome. It allows two-way communication, and I hope that the city will publicize this more so that more people know about it, and they have a better way of having kind of two-way communication given the time of social distancing. So, I think, I think we're doing the best we can at this moment, and so definitely want to say that totally appreciate it. The other thing is, I agree with Allison that it's safety first. I think we have to think about the people in our city and their safety first. I think that's critical. If everyone looks at the flatten the curve thing, right now, unfortunately, we're on the same kind of curve as Italy. But, if we take the right measures, do the right social distancing, do more remote meetings, we could be more like Singapore. So Singapore, I think they kind of threw this already. I just talked to one of our investors in Singapore, and 6 to 8 weeks later, it's like this somewhat normal. So that's great, right? And I think kind of the things we do now would help enable that. So as the mayor said, I've been trying to work with staff to enable our colleagues to be able to participate remotely, and as well as residents. So I hope to see this in place before our next meeting. And I'm thinking about the question that our mayor asked, which is, how can we help? And I think that's actually the most important question that we should answer. And so I've been thinking about this, and I think on council, kind of the biggest thing that we could do to help really is to help prioritize the city's expenses and time. So I think the city has a finite amount of resources, both in time and money and people. And I think it's for us on council to make difficult choices because I think on the detailed stuff, I'm pretty sure we have capable staff and they'll make the right decisions on what to do. But it's the big things, right? So do we do this in exchange or instead of doing this other thing? And so I think that's something that I think as council should do, is spend more time kind of like having the difficult discussions and trying to figure out what makes the list and what doesn't make the list. Because I think right now at this moment in our city's state, I think, like I said, I think safety has to be first. And so some other things maybe have to be second. And I think for us, as the city leaders, need to kind of have that debate, those hard discussions, and figure out what comes second. Because I think we've, in the past, have had the luxury of being very rich in resources and talented staff and money, and we could do pretty much everything we wanted. But I think, given the state right now, I think that's a lot harder. And so I think we should start thinking about that now, sooner than later, because even if this passes in 6 to 8 weeks, which I hope it will, given some of the measures we're doing, the economic impact is, even for places where we're short, like Singapore, has been far-reaching. I think everyone here has saw the stock market and seen the collapse. We're definitely in bear market territory. We're undoubtedly going to have a recession, maybe a very deep recession. It doesn't take a lot to see that, as the restaurants, as the retail doesn't do well, and as the stock market collapses, the stock compensation that a lot of our tech companies have or tech employees have, it's going to be pretty tough for everyone. And I think when I say everyone, I think it's everyone. It's not just our low wage workers. It's going to be everyone, right? Our housing prices are going to fall. We're going to have a lot of challenges, and so I think. And I think one thing that staff could start doing right now is, and I think the city manager already indicated that he's trying to do this, is looking at the economic impact. And that's one question which I was hoping the city manager could talk about in terms of I think you mentioned that our TOT and our sales tax is down significantly. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and where we are and where your projection will be if this keeps going for the next 6 weeks to 8 weeks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Well, speaking to economic impacts, clearly they will be severe. And among the indicators that Councilmember Tanaka mentioned, we do have information on hotel occupancy. It's not directly the transient occupancy tax information, but it's a pretty good indicator, and it is down significantly. Sales tax, we do not have current information. It's not published at a regularity that would be useful to recognize this phenomenon that's happened really over the last few weeks. But in recognition of the severity of the economic impacts that are really being felt by the community, we've implemented a hiring freeze that reflects future hiring really will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, recognizing that the city's ongoing expenses will need to be monitored very closely and in all likelihood cut back in recognition of the severe economic impact of this event.
Do you have any estimates as to what the forecasted drop in revenue is going to be?
At this point, I would hesitate. I certainly don't have at my fingertips any numbers that would be relevant there. I would invite our Finance Director, Kylie Nozay, to comment if she'd like to, but if she chooses not to, then that's perhaps just fine as well. Unfortunately, this is just too early to tell because the impact has hit so quickly.
Okay. Kylie, are you able to say a few words?
She shook her head.
Okay. So I guess I realize this is early and maybe it's a little bit hard to make projections, but I think one key thing that the council needs to know is, once you guys figure out what the revenue drop is going to be and what it would take to maintain the services that we have right now, how long could our budget stabilization reserve last? Our BSR is set up for times like this, so I think it would be good to know how long will it last, because if, of course, this situation lasts longer than our BSR, we need to start thinking about some other things. And this will let us know on council where the line needs to be drawn. So I think as soon as you guys have some sort of, and I realize this is going to be a moving target, you guys are probably going to have to update this frequently, I would imagine. But I think we're going to need to know that so that we know what makes the line, what doesn't make the line, so that we on council can have the debate as to what the priority of things are going to be, so that we can make sure that we are serving the community in the best way possible given the situation that we have. So that's one kind of for me, that's one really important thing that we should be doing somewhat on an ongoing basis, just to make sure that we can serve the community. I think the second thing that I would like my colleagues to consider here is we do have really good credit rating. I don't know how long our BSR will last, but maybe we want to consider doing a bond offering to give us more buffer. Maybe a lot of other people are thinking doing bond offerings, so maybe there's support that we get from the state or federal government. But I think those are things that we should look at in terms of trying to expand our reserve so that we have flexibility in terms of helping, needy people in our community, whether it be, people who've been laid off, people who, are suffering from, severe economic distress, or businesses here. I think that's something that we want to kind of get ahead of this, because while there hasn't been an actual impact yet in terms of at least the one that we could tangibly point at. It's undoubtedly going to happen, just given all the things that has happened so far. So I think looking at it or thinking about a bond offering might be something to think about. I think the other part, and it's what I talked about earlier, which is our expenses. I took a glance at next week's agenda, and I definitely see a lot of things on that consent calendar, which, while I think is great to do in normal times, I think us as leaders of cities need to look at that and make the hard decision as to really, is this what we need to do right now, or do we need to be able to spend our funds in areas that really help the people in our city. Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, it's really quiet. And then I think the last thing is, besides prioritizing our expenses, I think is to look at the priority of the things that we do here in the city. And so, we're not business as usual right now, given the situation. And so I think there are some things that we should think about whether we should be doing right now, or we should be putting off to later, to give staff the time that they need, the time and resources they need to focus on things that are more urgent. So one thing I would say, for instance, would be the business tax. I mean, right now, our businesses are suffering big time. Every single business. I mean, I don't think there's a business out there that hasn't been hit hard. And now putting a business tax in place doesn't seem the right thing to do, given the economic distress that the economy's in right now. Maybe we pick it up later once things pick up. But I think right now we should look at what can we take off of staff's plate to give them time to properly handle this emergency like they need to. So I think those are some of the things that I'd like to. I don't think we could solve it tonight, but those are some of the things that I like to see, and I'm hoping that we could put some of the stuff on the agenda and try to make some headway, because I think this is how we help is prioritizing the city's expenses and time and resources so that they could focus on things that are going to make a difference for us. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tanaka. All right, I just have a couple questions and comments. I'm going to make the motion for this, and hopefully we can move on. Just thinking about how we can help, a few things kind of come to mind. One is really focusing on augmenting, not getting in the way of our staff. These are the professionals. They have a lot of processes and plans in place. We need to let them work through them and do the operations to keep our citizens and community safe. Two, we are all, I'm sure, receiving lots of phone calls, texts, and emails every day. It's really important if we can filter that feedback to staff. I know I certainly had my knuckles rapped for sending a few too many to staff the past day or two. And so let's try to be filters for our community about what's super useful and what rises to the top in our estimation as community leaders. We should absolutely be there to share info. Thank you very much to staff, and Megan, thank you for setting up the community support line. I think that's going to be a really big help. Councilmember Tanaka did mention I set up a Slack channel for the Palo Alto community. If anybody wants to join, just shoot me an email to my City of Palo Alto email. It's easy to find. I see the city attorney looking at me. There's no Brown Act discussions going on there. It's purely for the community, for their support and help. Just one quick question to our three chiefs who are here. Feel free to answer or not. What worries you the most, or where do you think you need the most help?
Yeah, I'll go first, and if the other two chiefs wish to chime in. I think, first of all, our job is to plan, not worry, but I'll go with your verbiage. I'm concerned about what we don't know, the so-called unknown. We've been, as Councilmember Niss alluded to, a little bit ahead. Don't confuse lucky with being good, is one of our sayings. So there may be other shoes that drop that are hard for us to imagine. So there's a concept called failure of imagination when you talk about public safety and crisis planning and crisis communication. I want to be careful that we don't get sucked into that. As I alluded to before, just because we have COVID-19 in our crosshairs doesn't mean we get a hall pass on other things that could go on. So one of the reasons to activate the EOC is partially what has been talked about tonight, everything from tracking legislation and upper echelon government movement, all the way down to the need to be able to react quickly to the torrents, the fire hose of information, most of which tends to be noise, but there are little precious nuggets in there that we need to sift out. So I hope that helps. And
Thank
I'm
you.
happy if Bob or Gio want to come up.
Thank you, Chief, and I'll try to adopt some of your language as I'm learning. Chief Johnson or Blackshire, anything you'd like to add that is of concern to you, or how the council and city could help?
No, just that I'd like to let the council know what I've witnessed over the last couple of weeks from the members of the city has been extraordinary. The leadership has been phenomenal. We are doing nothing but planning. I think my biggest concern for law enforcement is not that we're not ready. We are. The men and women of the police department, I would say probably the same with GEO staff. This is what we hired on for, is to protect our communities. So I have not received one complaint from our staff in preparing and modifying their schedules or anything. Probably my biggest concern is somewhat what Ken said, the unknown and what this will have on them as a physical effect. We have a staff that really is essential, and we're trying to do our best, and I commend the city manager for leading us in this effort to protect their well-being, because they are a resource that we're going to need all the way through this. So hopefully we will be able to sustain that workforce, and if not, we'll modify and we'll adapt and we'll serve this community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, Geo Blackshire Fire Department. Just to mimic what Chief Johnson was talking about, I mean, we're doing such a good job because we're being really proactive where it's possible and reactive where it's unavoidable. And that's just the case when you're dealing with a situation like this with, as Chief Duker said, a moving target. We've been transporting many patients with symptoms, and we've been successful in not being any red flags because we've been able to protect ourselves with the appropriate equipment. It's a national crisis right now, is that the inventory, being able to capture that and make sure that they have the means to continue to protect themselves. So if anything's a worry, that's it, but we're on top of that, and we have plan after plan after plan should we run low on our stock, and we're working on that constantly. But I agree, it is the leadership in the city, with everything from city manager to communications, and working constantly with HR on how to get the information out to our people, and they have many questions. So it's just been a collective effort of all of ELT and working through this. So I'm really impressed, and I'm really confident we'll get through this.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
May I ask him a quick question?
Sure.
Chief, I'm going to guess you're probably interacting with all of the other fire departments right in our area?
Correct.
Okay, just so we know that you've got lots of backup out there as well as internally.
Correct. We're staying in constant contact because, as you know, the firefighters among the county, they talk also, and they're always asking questions. So it's really important that we communicate and we make sure that the same message is getting out, because we're providing the same service. We all have the same interests and goals on keeping our people safe, because the safer they are, the better they can serve the public. So that's key.
And you'll come to each other's rescue, of course.
Absolutely.
Good, thanks.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Chief. Just a quick note for the clerk. I'm getting a couple text messages that the video is dead, but just saying. We can look at that afterwards. With that, I will move that we ratify the proclamation of a local emergency. Seconded by Councilmember Niss. Not much to speak to. This is a 60-day local emergency. If need be, we can re-ratify it, I assume. And I hope this serves us well. Councilmember Niss, do you want to speak to your second?
I think this move is pretty obvious, and thank goodness we're there.
Okay. Any comments, questions on this? All right, let's please vote on the board. And Councilmember Tanaka, if you could just tell us how you vote?
Yes.
Okay, so that passes unanimously, 7-0. which ends this item for now. Just a quick note, if need be, we are absolutely willing and able to host an emergency meeting of the council to further discuss issues here. And for everyone out there listening or watching or not watching, our staff is hard at work keeping you all safe. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Chief. Last item of the night is item number 7, adoption of 2 ordinances amending Chapter 2.30 and Chapter 10.50 and 51 and Title 18, some cleanup of purchasing procedures, and a few other things. Does staff have a brief presentation?
So we do have a very brief presentation, and this is your second to the last item of the night, because we do have another closed
Thank you.
session.
Sorry.
Okay, so this item, council members, really typifies keeping completely routine business going. This is really an administrative item that just borderline almost, we put it on consent. But anyway, it's on the action agenda, and we hope that there's very little that actually of substance and policy that needs to be discussed. So very briefly, just to outline what's before you in this code update. It does touch a number of chapters, and primarily the theme of the update is to implement various changes that the council made in the budget in the city organizational structure, so way back last year when you adopted last year's budget. And then while we were doing that, we did a number of other administrative and non-substantive things to improve the code. So in Chapter 2.08, which is called Officers and Departments, we have codified those changes made in the budget process, which include creating an Office of Transportation, merging the former Department of Development Services into the Planning Group. So we now have Planning and Development Services, and updating department descriptions for all the departments to reflect modern tasks, technologies, and work practices. There was an attempt to strive for some consistency in departmental descriptions. The previous set of descriptions varied greatly, and these have more uniformity in their level of detail and their content. We cleaned up old language as much as possible, and we tried to make this code section a little easier to understand. Then we made some changes to Chapter 2.3, which are non-substantive changes to reflect clerical errors and cross-references that have changed over time. We have conformed to changes in state law rules on conflict of interest, and there is one new exemption from competitive solicitation in this section for some types of professional services contracts that deal with personnel safety and recruitment issues. And there is no changes to the signing authority levels of city procurement processes. Moving on to the zoning code Title 18, and the thing to know about this is that the Planning and Transportation Commission reviewed these changes and unanimously recommended the amendments to the 5 sections of the zoning code. These update procedures to clarify permit hearing fees in line with prior council directives and offer greater flexibility to the planning director to seek advice from ARB or PTC in situations where the director defers a decision to council. This is something that the community was interested in and the director is interested in as well, and it represents an expansion of our use of our 2 key planning commissions, ARB and the PTC. And then it does update to reflect, just titles to reflect the merged Department of Planning and Development Services. Lastly, there are changes to the chapters on parking. These edits reflect the separation of the Office of Transportation out of the Department of Planning. So places where we previously said certain decisions would be made by the planning director, those decisions are now within the portfolio of the Office of Transportation, and so that change has been made. The Chief Transportation Officer is now the listed position in charge of RPP and overnight parking instead of being delegated authority from the Director of Planning, and there are no changes to any of the parking roles or the RPP district areas, no substantive changes. And that completes my summary. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. I think that's a light from the Vice Mayor. right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a very light code cleanup compared to some years, and I think I agree with all the changes as is. But I did want to highlight the last one. And Ed, maybe you can make sure Jonathan's aware of my concerns. But if you guys look at packet page 175, it's 1877060 about fees. And we're striking that there shall be no fee required for such a hearing. So it was actually item 7 on March 28th of 2016 that all of the planning fees had gone to finance and been reviewed and then came to council. And Councilmember Philseth, Niss, and myself were on the council at that time. And we actually had a really lengthy discussion about the philosophy behind a lot of these fees. And the motion ended up passing 7-0 with 2 people absent, but council at the time was concerned about charging fees for an appeal regardless of the findings. So if somebody appeals and they were found to be correct. And I just wanted to clarify that we don't always go for full cost recovery. So the report, mentioned this change that we are a cost recovery department, but I think council has had very explicit discussions about we're not always 100% focused on cost recovery. And so I think it's as worded, it's okay. In 2016, we said that there should be a $280 fee. And Molly, thank you for the work. She looked it up. That fee's now up to $595 over 4 years, which doesn't seem to be like a cost of inflation. So I'm not sure what happened in between then and now, but that those fees had crept up to a point where it was prohibitively expensive for somebody to make an appeal. So again, no change, but I just want Jonathan to be aware of that and keep that in mind.
Okay, Councilmember Cormac and then Philseth.
My question is on packet page 116. It refers to the professional services contracts that you were mentioning, Ms. Stump. It's section T at the top. So how does it work currently? I understand how it would work if we make this change today, but currently are all of these professional services contracts required to be competitively bid?
So, thank you. So there's no particular exemption that applies. There's no specialized exemption for this in the current code. So the level of procurement competitive process depends on the size. So our procurement program in general has 3 tiers. Below, for very small dollar contracts, no competitive solicitation is required. For medium, small, an informal process can be used, and then for larger services contracts, they must be competitively solicited. So these types of contracts do follow those procedures unless another exemption applies, which would be relatively rare.
Okay, so currently, in the last year, these would have had to be competitively bid if they were in that 3rd category.
I'm sorry, Councilmember, could you repeat your question?
I'm trying to understand how we have done it up until today. So I think I understand how we will do it going forward. I'm just trying to understand the delta from up until today and then going forward.
Rumi Portillo, Human Resources Director. Currently, if we do have an immediate need for workplace safety consulting services or recruitment services, we do either go for a sole source, which requires additional steps and can delay, or we have to hold until we go through a competitive process. And so some of the circumstances we might have would be things like if there is a workplace hazard, and there may be an occupational specialist who's required to either evaluate air quality, we could have environmental issues. There could also be a workplace violence issue that would require a safety expert to come on site immediately. And so in instances like that, under our current procurement process, we do not have an exemption to act immediately. And so that has, we have been trying to problem solve this for quite some time.
And am I right that these would be, many of these would be very specialized expertise, right? You aren't going to be able to get this from, your average
That's right. They're very much niche types of services, very specialized for the workplace, and often we have trouble even having availability of services. And so once you have specialists and then require them to go through a cumbersome, lengthy process, they will not be available.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Councilmember Filsath. Oh, it was Councilmember Niss. Councilmember Tanaka, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do actually, and it's just right after what Cormac was saying. So, I could see that for maybe like threat assessment, conflict prevention, maybe even like industrial safety. But recruitment consultants seems rather broad. I mean, why? Why would you not competitively bid that? It seems to be kind of out of place with the other ones on item T.
Yes, I could understand that perspective, but the reality in the type of recruitments that we conduct in public sector requires specialized recruiting firms that are familiar with the government sector. And the issue that we're having is that for a number of years, there has been a shortage of available and experienced recruiters. And so because of that dynamic, and because they're overburdened and have more demand than are available, then we are competing for the best recruiters. And again, it's back to having a lengthy or a cumbersome process will deter the best recruiters from coming in because they have a market segment. And there are many times that we are in rather urgent circumstances to get out for the best, get out into the market for the best candidates, and we're competing against other municipalities that don't have the same kinds of restrictions that we have. And so we can lose out on the best performing recruiters that are available.
So, we're kind of going to a different stage, right? We've been in one of the biggest boom cycles for the past 10 years until the past couple of weeks. And now the market's in free fall. And, we went from a situation where we had negative unemployment to now when we actually have real unemployment. Do you really see this kind of, and I definitely understood before that there was a really tough time getting talent, but do you see that it's going to be as competitive given the situation of our economy at this point in time?
For the most part, what we're talking about are specialized recruiting firms. The typical types of recruitments that we are hiring recruiting firms for would include our executive management and hard-to-fill utilities positions, and it's highly likely that we will continue to have difficulties hiring for specialized and executive positions.
Let me also add, Councilmember, that a majority of our recruitments are actually done in-house, so that the situations that we're referring to requiring this code provision are just a subset of the overall recruiting that's done through the city. And recognizing that this is a code change really does need to reflect the ups and downs of the economic cycles.
Okay, well, thank you for answering.
Okay, I don't see any other lights, so I will move the staff report. Seconded by the Vice Mayor. If you'll please vote on the board. And Councilmember Tanaka, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. That passes unanimously. We are now on to Councilmember comments, questions, and announcements. I think we've all had a busy enough week. So hopefully we can save it, but if there's something important that we all need to know about, please hit your light. Councilmember Niss?
I don't have next week's agenda in front of me. Beth, do you have a copy of next week's agenda before I speak to an item that may not be on there? Do I recall we have a 5 to 7 study session? Am I correct?
That's correct. It's on the topic of the business tax.
And the vice mayor, the city manager, and I will be reevaluating our agendas and ongoing meetings for this week and in the future very shortly. But
My question would be, do we need to take another look at that before we spend a couple of hours on it next week? That was for you, Ed. Sorry. You know, it's hard to tell with a mask on, isn't it?
It's true. So I'm sorry. I think as the mayor pointed out, we can look at your agenda again, recognizing now that we've got a shelter-in-place order. I think the question is that an item that would justify a public discussion? And so I think I'll consult with the mayor on that topic.
Okay, good. I wanted to raise it because I know that we're kind of going in a different direction. And as I sent a note to you, meeting will be decided upon what information or whatever.
great, thank you.
That's still a question. Not that meeting. I mean, our normal meetings are scheduled out. Do you anticipate we will still need those meetings in March?
I think we can look at the issues that are coming up. By and large, you know, quite frankly, majority of your items are on the consent agenda. And as Vice Mayor pointed out, normalcy is important, and to the extent that remote work is happening, ideally we could have council consideration and approval of the items that are routine. I do think, as has been pointed out, there is a balance now as we move forward with what is effective public engagement in this new environment. And while we'll be working on the tools to make it as easy as possible for the public to communicate to the council as a part of your deliberations, I do think, you know, the topics themselves may need to slide based on the challenges of effective public engagement when we're sheltering in place.
So I realize you and the mayor will discuss this, but at this point, should we continue to leave Mondays available, or I think the 30th is a Monday where we're not scheduled, but we should continue to leave those on our calendar?
Yes, please. Please don't leave town.
Okay.
Stay in
Wasn't
place.
thinking of
Shelter in
it.
place.
I thought I'd get stopped at the border anyway, wouldn't I?
With that mask, probably. Councilmember Koo, do I see a light from you?
Just very quickly, last week, Wednesday, Supervisor Joe Simitian had a couple of meetings here in Palo Alto with regards to safe parking. And what they're looking for is to identify more lots with potentially a higher number than the 4 or 5 spots. And there was a lot of very good attendance. It was about 30 folks who attended the meeting. There was also representatives from the Buddhist Church, from Unity Church, from First Congregational, but it was a very productive meeting, and I understand that his office is talking with staff about possible Palo Alto sites.
Thank you. So with that, we move to our final item of... Yep. Greg, go for it. Go for it.
Okay, yeah. So I guess, first of all, I hope to work with staff to make sure that we can enable everyone to work remotely or call in remotely next week. So would really appreciate everyone's help on that, especially staff's. And then second thing is, and I'll keep it really brief because I know we're looking to do another item. Liz and I went to Washington, D.C. for the National League of Cities. And I'm not going to go over details of all the things that we did, but one thing that was actually a very good meeting was we met with the person who's the liaison to the FAA, Elaine Chow's office. Elaine Chow's the Transportation Secretary for the DOT. And, I think there's definitely been a sea change in terms of, I think they've been getting a lot of feedback about the noise. And in fact, they were going to be starting a pilot at Massport with MIT. So MIT has a way of distributing the airplane noise. So it's not over just one place, but distributing it over like a wider area, like a 2-3 mile area. And and there's interest in potentially doing that at SFO. So there's a lot more detail behind this. Councilmember Nis joined me, as well as the mayor from Cupertino, and a few other council members from other cities, like City of Culver. So it was a really good meeting. It looks like there's a willingness to try to get some headway in this. Of course, now with all the kind of coronavirus stuff going around, I don't know where things will head right now, but it seemed encouraging, and I was excited to see that there's a glimmer of hopeful progress there.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Tanaka and Nis, for going to the National League for us. Last item is a closed session item, conference with city attorney on potential litigation, Crown Castle Cluster 2 small cell nodes. Do we have any public speakers on this last item? Is there a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Cormack. I'll second it. And if you'd please vote on the board. And Greg, how do you vote?
Yes.
Yes, so that passes unanimously. This is scheduled for about 45 minutes. And Greg will reconnect in the back.
Okay, do I call into the other number?
Staff will give you a call or connect with you or something. We'll call your cell. Greg, we're going to call your cell in a few minutes.
Okay, bye.